Mark Fava, welcome to the conversation today.
Great, John. Thanks for having me.
It is a real pleasure to be joining you. You're joining us from South Carolina. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about your recent book, Lessons from the Admiral, Naval Wisdom and Sea Stories for Leaders. I always love different takes on leadership and particularly military takes on leadership. It's always really fun to hear different stories and different approaches. And this will be a really fun way to go about hearing your wisdom, your experiences, to apply them into life, into workplace settings, into various arenas, and how we can be more effective. As we get started, I wanted to share Mark's bio with everybody. Mark C. Fava is a career aviation lawyer and retired naval flight officer. He is a prolific writer and entertaining speaker. He retired from the U.S. Navy as a captain, having commanded 3 units, including an aviation squadron. He has been a law firm partner and a corporate executive lawyer. He has written numerous articles, including What I Learned from the Judge in the South Carolina Lawyer and Steering Through a Crisis, Lawyers as Leaders in the Washington Lawyer. As a law school adjunct professor, he has also taught aviation law and legal writing. And you can find more information about him at markcfava.com. Mark, anything you would like to highlight about your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation about your book?
No, John, I think you covered it. The website is out there. It's got a contact me form and happy to talk to anybody, not only about the book, but about leadership, but about speaking about any of the above. So thank you for that kind introduction.
Awesome, awesome. Well, when talking to authors about books, the first thing I always love to ask is kind of like the origin story. So, what prompted you here? It's like books are a labor of love. They take a lot of effort. Oftentimes they percolate for a really long time. Why this book? Why now?
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head. It did percolate for a long time, over 30 years. So my last job in active duty in the Navy, I worked as an admiral's aide, and what I learned in that job, working for a tremendous boss, were leadership traits and lessons that I picked up and that I carried through with me, not only in law school, but as a lawyer, as a naval reservist, and
Yeah.
ultimately as an in-house lawyer. So I just finally said during the pandemic, you know what? Let's just finally write. I'd written some notes down, and I said, I'm finally going to just write it down and publish a book. And it took me 2 years to do it. And you're right, it was a labor of love.
Yeah. Well, and like many, it sounds like it was a pandemic project.
It was.
I
It
think
was.
many can relate to that.
Yeah, I was sitting around watching it. I never used to watch a whole lot of TV. I was always just too busy with, either my reserve duty or work or 3 daughters and my wife. So I decided in Netflix, I started binging TV and Netflix. I'd never done that before during the pandemic. And I said, boy, this is just not, other than watching Schitt's Creek and getting a good laugh, this is not a good
Love
use
that
of my
show.
time. So I started writing, and it really was a product of the pandemic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for me, my pandemic project was this podcast, I'd
Yeah.
always listened to podcasts and I was missing talking to people and interacting and traveling. And I'm like, why don't I start a podcast and then I can still talk to interesting people from all over. And so this was my project, during the pandemic that has continued. But yeah, I think lots of people had pandemic projects. Well, that's great. I
Right.
love hearing about the origins of books and the fact that this was percolating for 30 years, all of these experiences, all these things that now find their way into this book so everyone can learn about, what you experienced. I think that's fantastic. Um, okay, so as we get into the book, tell us a little bit about the structure of it and how you laid out the different lessons that people can learn about.
Yeah, sure. Listen, you said you've got the title. It's lessons from the Admiral, and most people would pick up the book or they'll email me and call me and say, hey, it's going to be a great book. It's Mark talking about when he was an admiral. Well, Mark never was an admiral. It's just the opposite, right? It's me as a young admiral's aide trying to figure out and how to serve a leader who was not only demanding but also very empathetic. And there was just a series of things that I did over that 18 months, and I call them C stories. That's what we call them in the Navy. It was either a success, a failure, an organizational element, or a leadership element that came out of the story. And I just said, gosh, there's about 19 chapters of this, and each one ends with a what I learned segment. Some of them are quite entertaining where I failed miserably, and others are major successes. And then not only what I did, but more importantly, how he treated me and how I then inherited that as part of my leadership fabric
Mm.
going forward.
Yeah, well, wonderful. I like that structure of each chapter, and I love that you were able to garner, those good examples along the way. I have to admit, when I think of military leadership examples, I definitely have heard many good examples, but I have this character in my head of also negative examples of
Yes.
like the guy in your face screaming at you,
Yes.
like this command control authoritarian, blah, 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 right? I have that kind of thing running in my head, which to me doesn't sound like a great example. But I know better. I know I've talked to many people that have been through the military, who've had leadership roles in the military, who've led tons of people. You just go back to, like the classic movie White Christmas, right? Everyone
Yes.
loves, the general, right? Clearly, there's a whole wide variety of people who have all different leadership styles, and so I love hearing that there's just wonderful examples.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I've got a section in the book, and I think the quote is in the "What I Learned" section is, "Don't be a screamer," right?
Mm,
Because to your point, you see screamers not only in the military, but I saw them at law firms, and I've seen them in
sure,
previous employers. So
sure.
you and I both know that's not conducive to any type of workplace. And all a real good boss has to do is just look at you and say, like the Admiral would tell me when I messed up, he would just say, don't let this happen again. That's all he needed to say, right? He didn't need to scream. I got it loud and clear. And that was much more effective than yelling and screaming.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, I'm a university professor.
Right.
And you would think in higher education, like at a university, probably not the first place someone would think there would be screamers. But my goodness, I'll tell you, here in at the university in administration, there are plenty of people who are screamers, and it's ridiculous, and it's not
Yeah.
appropriate, and it's not
Right.
effective. Like it just should not happen. It shouldn't happen in any
Right.
organization. And it does. It
Exactly.
does. It happens in lots of organizations, and it's just not effective.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, all right. So maybe you could highlight for us. I would love to just hear, maybe even just succinctly, like two or three of your favorite stories that you think are illustrative of what people can learn from your book.
Yeah, the beginning, I just talk about nuts and bolts. If you're going to be a middle manager or you want to aspire to be a leader, what are the just nuts and bolts tackling things that are very important, right? The stuff that you and I know now that's very important that I think sometimes gets lost through generationally. And I try and tell my daughters about it. Very simple, being on time, knowing who's in the room, knowing the background of people, making sure you understand timeliness and where you're going. So I've got one story where we were on a week-long trip, and every trip is, you're flying, you're getting in a car, you're going to meetings. Everything has to be on time and punctual, and you got to watch the schedule. And we're on the fourth or fifth day of a round the country trip where we've been to several locations, and we were leaving New Orleans at a naval base there to head to Jacksonville for a military ceremony. And I sort of I will say, let my hair down. I was sort of relaxing because it was the end of the trip. And Admiral didn't have to do anything once we got there, other than we were just going to be a guest at this
Mhm.
military ceremony. He didn't have to speak or anything. So we get on the plane and we start flying there. We're in a little Navy prop plane that was specifically chartered to take us there, military aircraft, obviously. And we're about 15 minutes in the air, and he says, what time does the ceremony begin when we get there? And I tell him the time, and he looks at his watch and he says, that can't be right. That's 20 minutes from now. And believe it or not, I'd completely failed to account for the 1 hour difference between New Orleans and Jacksonville,
Um,
Florida.
oh, looks like I lost you.
that was not good, a good time. But there are plenty of stories like that where there were failures, and he allowed me to move on from that. Now, I will say, if there were catastrophic failures repeatedly, I knew he would relieve me. And his first aid, he had relieved because just for those reasons, just too many failures. So he would kid with me at the end of a trip. If I messed something up, he'd just say, "Hey, look, it's better to be lucky than good, and you got lucky today. So go
Yeah.
home." I said,
So
"Okay,
yeah, there's
good."
still expectations and there's still,
Yes,
you still have to perform
yes,
it, but there's also a level of like a recognition that there's going to be learning occurring.
right,
Like nobody's perfect. There's some level of mercy and just a recognition that yeah, like uh messing up is only real failure if you're not learning from it and if you
right,
repeat the same mistake over and over again, right? And like you
exactly.
said, if it's not a catastrophic failure, then it really is just a learning opportunity. And if you take it seriously, like clearly you did, then you're just growing from it. And he had the wisdom to recognize that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, so how I've incorporated that over the years when I ultimately became in charge of leading people or people reporting to me, I would tell them, if you make a mistake, come to me quickly and let me know and let's sort it out. It doesn't get better over time. And I have another chapter that just talks about that. Ask for help early and often if you need it. And what you will find is, to your point, John, a good leader will help you. A good leader will not only help you, but will take care of you out of that mess. And then to your point too, don't do it again, right? Let's learn from this one. Let's not let it happen again.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I love that story, and I think we probably could all relate a bit. I know I've never been in that exact situation, but I've definitely messed up time zones. Been there.
Yeah, I think it was just filling out a form, and it said, back in the day, we would request military transportation and we'd fill out a form and you'd say takeoff time. And I think I didn't say no later than have to arrival time, or I'd given them a 3 hour window. When they picked up the flight,
Sure.
they got us there in that 3 hour window, but I should have said, exact time, Eastern time.
Right, right. Well, very good. Any others that you would like to highlight?
Yeah, there are a couple others. I mean, we another great one was I was responsible for his. So when he was speaking at a ceremony, I was responsible for the speech, right? And it had to be in the binder on the podium, no different than a university ceremony or graduation. You got a couple hundred people in the audience, everybody's in their dress uniform. He walks up. And he speaks, and whenever he's speaking, I'm always in the audience, maybe 2 rows back from the family looking at him. I had written a speech and I had helped him with the speech. I knew, the timing of the speech. And right before he would give the speech, we had this process where I would run down the hall back in the day, make a photocopy of the speech because he would be editing it on the way. Uh, I would take a copy and put it in the binder. I would give him the original, and then I would save a third copy. So we always had 3 copies. So if anybody messed with it on the stage, which junior officers would often do back in the day, they'd try and get to the speech and mess with the admiral's speech. He had a copy he could always pull out. And absolute worst case, if I had to, I could, walk up to the stage and hand him one. So he starts this beautiful speech. He gets about 4 or 5 minutes into it. And then he just goes off message. And I knew he was going off message, like I said, because I had written the speech and he had edited it. And then he sort of glares at me. And then he flips the page and then looks back down. And then finally he gets back on message. So after it was over, I run up to him as I often do, taking his gloves, taking his military sword off. He hands me his cover. It's all automatic by then. He's just handing me this stuff. And he always asked me, how did I do? People were congratulating him. Someone said, "Hey, that was a great speech, Admiral." And he said, "Well, I'm really glad." He goes, he called me the loop because that's what we wore, the loop for the Admiral's aid. He said, "Loop here, help me with it." And then he leaned down and said, "How did I do?" I said, "Admiral," he said, I think you did, pretty good. I said, "But a couple minutes into it, you sort of lost your way." And then he looked at me and said, "It was missing page 12. Don't ever let that happen again." Right. So back in the day, right, the old photocopy machine would run through 2 pages that stuck together. I hadn't page checked it. I'd very quickly put it in the binder. He flips over, it goes from page 11 to 13, and he had to recover. Let me tell you, never again did I ever do any document as a lawyer or helping people write speeches or my own documents that I didn't page check the documents.
You always double checked after that.
Double check. And again, all he
Good,
had to
good
do was say,
life
"Don't ever,
lesson.
Yeah, all he had to do was say, "Don't ever let that happen again." But I filed hundreds of documents in the court when I was a litigator, and every single time, when I would upload something to the PDF document, every page would be numbered, and I would check it. And I never did that again.
Yeah, yeah. Very good. Very good. And again, I can't relate directly to that exact example, but I've been in similar types of situations. And yeah, you learn what to check, you learn how to
Right.
build in redundancies, things like that that are just very useful throughout your career. I definitely had those types of experiences.
Yeah, and that's what I learned because as you mentioned earlier, so much of what I did in the military was completely transferable to the civilian world. So it might not be pet checking for pages, but it might be when I'm traveling in my civilian job. I'm always double checking. Do I have a rental car confirmation? Do I have the flights? Do I have it written down just in case I lose my iPhone or something? So I think that's the type of redundancy I think is critical, and those skills became very transferable, both as a lawyer and as a leader later on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm curious what you feel like, all these years later, you had this wonderful military career, you've had a wonderful legal career, you've been able to get all of this down in this wonderful book, all these wonderful lessons, all of these insights of lessons learned at the end of these chapters. Um, if you had to try, I mean, this is an impossible ask, but if you had to try to like succinctly boil it down
Yeah.
to like that golden nugget of
Yes.
like leadership lesson for the audience today, what would that be?
Yeah. I think it's really twofold, and the first one sort of goes right into the second one. The first one is always say thank you. Always be appreciative of your team.
Gratitude. Yeah.
Gratitude is huge, and then empathetically take care of your people. Right. So my job as a leader, or has been as a leader, that if the people who are working for me ultimately get promoted to bigger and better jobs, then I've done a good job, right? So always take care of your people, as you mentioned. Um, you give them responsibility, you demand accountability, you tutor and you mentor. But at the end of the day, your job is to make sure that they're successful. That's the key, and I thought that was what he did very, very well.
Yeah. And there's nothing special about a leader who just points out deficiencies, who then
Right.
kicks that person to the curb, and
Yes.
then, cycles through people. It takes no talent or
Yeah.
skill to be that kind of a person. And we've all seen people like that.
Right.
And they're obnoxious and it's painful to watch, both for the people that they're stomping on, but also for the to see them. Like it's
Yes.
really a manifestation of insecurity, really. And that's not what leadership's about. I'm a big proponent of servant leadership as a
Right.
principle, as a philosophy. Like leadership is about building up the people around you, and a rising tide lifts all ships. The best way for you to be effective as a leader is not to like try to lift yourself up and to be like lording over people as if you're better than everyone. It's to focus on helping everyone around you to be the best they can be. And then guess what? They're going to be awesome, which makes you look awesome. And then you're an
Yes.
amazing leader, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing if you have that level of, I would say, military camaraderie or friendship or allegiance, where they know you're going to take care of them and they're going to perform, and you're going to, vice versa, you're going to take care of each other. Performance just happens. Matter of fact, it becomes excellent performance, because people
Yeah.
want to do well. And I also talked about, when people come to me that I'm mentoring now, and I know they've got a tough boss, not one that you and I would aspire to work with or for. I just tell them, look, you got a choice. What I've been done in those situations is I've outlived, outlast. But I have this line in my book where I say, I learned as much from bad leaders as I did from good leaders, right? So we
Mhm.
learn from bad leaders exactly how we don't want to be and who we don't want to be. And you just take that and incorporate that just as you would the leadership lessons of the good leader. And then you get the survival mode. If you're going to stick around, you just outlive, outlast, right? You do your job, respect the position, maybe not the person, and then just outlive, outlast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Mark, this has just been a real pleasure. I know at the time I need to let you go here in a minute, but before we wrap things up, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your book, and then give us the final word.
Sure. Listen, thank you so much, John, for having me. I'm just very excited about being here. Again, the website is markcfava.com. From there, you can get to the book. The book is on every major retail bookseller, so Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of those places. And believe it or not, even before it's released, it was a Amazon bestseller based on pre-orders alone. So I'm just very happy about that, and happy, like I said, to speak on it, talk about leadership, and I really appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Mark can do for you, check out the book. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great